when we talk about the term physical distribution, it sort of implies the distribution of a finished product to the back end of the chain, right? However, when we talk about logistics as a term is far all encompassing, it's a broad umbrella. And the term logistics typically includes the input of raw material from the suppliers into the manufacturing all the way back to the consumer. That whole term of logistics is a broad term, that's what's meant. However, like I said, fundamental here to our understanding is that every block, every stage, every intermediary, every channel has some kind of a value feature component, right? And we'll talk a little bit more about that momentarily, right, in terms of some of the future trends. So when we recognize then that every stage here, every intermediary delivers something, there's some kind of value added feature, we can say, okay, well, you know, broadly, how does this kind of work, right? From a marketing perspective, how does it work? And so when we look at it from an activity perspective, and this is an important point here that I'm guessing, you know, we recognize that there are two broad kind of activities here that we can look at. Push and pull. So what's the difference between push and pull? Well, when we talk about push, fundamentally, what are we trying to do? We are trying to load up the next channel member with our inventory. We're trying to get them to carry our product. That's what we're trying to do. And we can use a variety of means of doing it. Various types of sales promos and features and all kinds of stuff. But it's all about trying to get them to carry our product, right? That's what push marketing activities are. Conversely, we can have pull activities, right? Pull activities, and what are they? That's where we try to get that next channel member to ask for our product by name. So we're trying to get them to ask for our product, our brand by name, right? So invariably, you know, at a B2C level, you're trying to get customers to ask for your brand by name. Here, let me give you a quick little example of that, and I will circle back and use this example again. You know, midnight, you're watching TV and you see an ad come up for various types of pharmaceuticals. Right? And so what is the essence of that ad for pharmaceuticals? Various types of pharmaceuticals designed to address various problems. What is that? It's basically designed to try to stimulate the consumer to ask the physician for a prescription for that particular medication. That's what that's all about, right?
Get them to contact.
And so Big Pharma then is bypassing, you know, the
advertising regulations and
bypassing the physician, trying to capture the consumer to get them to ask the physician for it. What is that? That's a type of a pull kind of an activity. So yeah, we can think of channels of distribution as we build our understanding of this. We can think of it then in terms of being sort of an extension of the original firm. Think of it as being sort of an extension of the firm, right? And that's how we want to think of it. And so, as I said before, is this only relegated to the goods producing firms? Yeah, no, absolutely not. This absolutely has a huge implications for services also, and we'll talk more about that. So, when we talk about channels of distribution, you know, very broadly, there are two major types of schemas, systems that we can think about. Two major ones. Other ones are built on that. There's a few other ones we'll talk about. But they're two very basic, broad kinds of systems at play. You know what they are? Direct and indirect. So when we talk about direct, what are we talking about here? We're talking about from the firm directly to, you know who? The consumer. So when I order my Dell computer, you know, who do I talk to configure the product? I go directly to Dell, and they
send it
directly to little old me. What is that? A direct channel. I would argue that, 35 years ago, Dell was the first manufacturer to bring that kind of a model. It was a very innovative kind of a model. Absolutely facilitated a sustained competitive advantage for Dell. So yeah, they absolutely were the first to sort of do that in the industry. However, we can also have other various forms of intermediaries, right? Especially in international business, we can use the services of agents and or brokers. Depending on what we're doing, we could also use wholesalers, who in turn sell it to the retailer, and then of course the retailer connects with the ultimate consumer. So if this is direct, what do we call all of the other ones then?
Indirect marketing channels.
So we have direct versus indirect. So this is more in a B2C kind of a context, but the same broad principles apply in B2B, in more of an industrial kind of a setting also. However, when we look at the industrial setting, yeah, we can have direct or we can have indirect, absolutely. However, typically in a B2B kind of a context here, we see that the chains are typically a bit shorter and there are fewer players that we see in there for a variety of reasons that we will talk about momentarily. So, when we look at channels of distribution here like this, we could look at sort of the dynamic nature and the interplay between these channels and the various structures that exist. Now, here's a point in terms of structure of the overall channel of distribution, the overall structure here that needs to be recognized. And that is, we realize that consumer tastes, desires, needs, wants are always shifting. And so therefore, if consumer needs and wants and attitudes are always shifting, here's a point, so too should channel structures be shifting and changing also. So just like everything else in marketing that I'm sharing with you, it is not cast in concrete, never ever to change. Everything is in a state of flux, ideally, and everything is, changing, to reflect current times. And if those astute marketers and those astute CEOs can do that, and they will remain successful. Those that fail to do that, sadly, wither. But so that's a key thing. So not only should the structure of channels change in relation to consumer changing needs and wants, but also there are other changes and forces within the marketplace that will affect the overall structure. I'm thinking pest here, all the pest things, right? What's pest again?
Political, economic,
all of those things, right?
Technological,
Political
legal,
forces, economic, socio-cultural aspects, right? Technological, all
legal,
of those things impact, the ideal structure that you could adopt. We realize that innovation and novel kind of approaches of setting up these channels is important too. Like I said, 30 years ago, 35 years ago, or whatever, 30 years ago, Dell was absolutely at the forefront of establishing this tailored product directly prepared for the consumer, built for the consumer, direct from the company to the consumer. And so that innovative kind of an approach really yielded for Dell, I would argue, a competitive advantage relative to competitors, and in a very sustained way. So it's important to realize that. I would also suggest, and we spoke about this a little bit before, that again, I'll ask you the same thing. When was the last time we made an airline booking, as I did last night, to go to Washington, D.C. this summer for a conference? When was the last time, you made
physically?
Exactly, a booking physically at a travel agent or someone else, right? I can't remember the last time I did it. Actually, I probably can. It's probably about 1987. It's probably the last time I did that. Yeah. So how do we do it? We go online.
Online.
So the bottom line here is that fundamentally, and I've said this to you before, the internet right now has become essentially a channel.
Channel.
That has become a channel where the consumer
Online
can go
channel.
to make those kind of purchases. Right? So it's very interesting to see how that has developed. And like I said, yeah, relative to the competition, that kind of differential advantage can be established. You know, using innovation and full kind of like that. So that is key. So when we talk about the various functions, what do they do? The various functions of these channels. What are some of the functions of these intermediaries? What are some of the functions? Well, to help us understand what they do, right? So, again, as we build our understanding of them, well, we can look at them in a variety of ways. There are three major umbrellas that we can establish here when we look at the functions that are performed by channel members. First one is what we call more transactional. And that comes, like I said, each one of these comes in a variety of shapes and sizes. When we talk about transactional, what is it? It's all about setting up and facilitating that transaction, right? So if I lend you money to buy my products, that's a transactional kind of a function, right? It's a financially based kind of a thing. More about that. So transactional nature to facilitate that kind of a transaction. There are logistical aspects associated, right? Logistical function. Here, what are we talking about? Where transactional is more about buying and selling. Logistical here is more about transportation, warehousing, and that distribution, that kind of a thing, right? And then so lastly, the third and last major category of functions here is what we call facilitating, right? Facilitating. This is sort of enabling a purchase, such as, you know, an electronic means, internet, you know, agents can do that, bring a buyer and a seller together. Agents and brokers can bring a buyer and a seller together. An agent can work on behalf of a buyer to get an appropriate seller, et cetera, right? So we have that. So we have a bunch of services then that can fall into one of these three major categories of functions. So what are some of the more fine-grained approaches to services? Well, like I said, how about something like financing, right, through a retailer, right? I could finance the retailer, I could give them a loan to accept some of my inventory, for example, right? So financing is a key thing. And in so doing, you know, very often when a retailer then assumes inventory, or when a wholesaler or some kind of an intermediary assumes inventory, for example, what is happening here? There is essentially a risk-taking component that exists, right? So, for example, if we have you know, a furniture guy whose business it is to buy locally procured, locally made wood furniture, he buys the furniture from a craftsman, brings it to another business that will stain it, polish it, and get it all ready, and then this same guy will take that and deliver it to the consumer's house. Right? So how does that kind of little scenario work? Well, the guy will buy it from the craftsman. So what happens here? In turn, he assumes risk. He's buying it. He assumes risk. In turn, and he pays subsequently, he pays for the finishing and then he charges the consumer, right? So that's an assumption of risk. So that's a key thing, right? We also recognize that market research is a key kind of a function, right? There's a lot of knowledge that can come up through the channel members for various decision makers at every stage of the way. We'll talk more about that at the back end. You know, and then there's this aspect of matching and customizing, you know, products. There's a negotiation component very important in power, that we'll talk about later. You know, there's service, there's a service component also, such as warranty, repair. Sorry? Can't hear you. Oh. There's warranty, support, repair, all that kind of a thing, right? So that could be an additional component that a channel could facilitate. We'll talk about that too, momentarily, as well as, of course, potentially physical assembly and distribution, all that kind of stuff, right? So we have all that kind of a thing going on. Now, in a very broad sense, we recognize that all this stuff is going on. However, let's drill into that then and try to understand again some of the factors then that impact the overall system that we're talking about. And, you know, when we look at it that way, though it's not indicated here, what I'm about to talk to off of these bullets will fall into these categories. But there are four major kind of approaches here that we can take, four major sets of factors, if you will, that help us to understand it. And they have to be considered when making channel choices. And the first one is sort of the environmental condition, right? What is the prevailing environmental condition overall, right? What is the state of the sea on which we are sailing our ship, in other words, right? What's happening in the environment? And that, you know, has economic, political, all those things that we were talking about, right? So the environmental kind of aspects, right? Importantly, like I also said before, what about individual consumer needs and wants? And those shifts, right? So, you know, consumer factors, that's the second one. Thirdly, the third major set of factors that impact the channel choice in the system are actual product aspects. Product aspects. I mean, if you are, you know, a manufacturer of nuts and bolts and nails and fasteners, that's a completely different system from, say, if you are a, you know, a wholesaler of fresh flowers, or if you are a winery, or if you're an alcohol distillery, or if you're a beer brewery, right? All of these things, for a whole bunch of reasons, have a whole impact on the structure that would be used, right? So we have that. So that's the third thing. And lastly, we have particular company factors, right? Company factors that are involved in the overall channel choice. You know, what are the strengths and weaknesses of the individual firm? What are their core competencies? What is their strategic aspect? How are they owned? Are they publicly owned, privately owned? What are they trying to do within the marketplace? So those are four major categories then that affect the overall choice and configuration of the system. Now, when we drill into that, then again, you know, we can look at some of these aspects. Like I said, consumer behavior, CB, consumer behavior has a huge role to play, right? The needs and the wants of the consumer are important. What are the competitors doing, right? Under the umbrella of environment. What are the competitors doing? That's a key thing. We've had a whole session on that. You have to recognize, you know, what the competitive threats are out there. Because there are plenty of competitors up there that will sneak up behind us and drive a dagger through our hearts to try to kill us, figuratively speaking, in order to take over our market share, right? Like I always facetiously say, would Nissan like to destroy Toyota?
Yes. Definitely.
Yeah. Would Coca-Cola like to destroy Pepsi? 100%.
Yes.
Yeah. So that's kind of a facetious way to look at it. You know, and what about the marketing, the overall marketing strategy, you know, in terms of recognition that our logistical approach and our channel system has to support our overall marketing strategy. So in other words, if we target, set up objectives, target consumers, do environmental, all that stuff, if we select and target the consumers, which is the basis of our strategy, we need to figure out then how to arrange the system in order to get our product to the consumer, right? Which is key. And then, of course, we recognize that the whole notion of individual resources are very important here too, you know. What kind of resources can we bring to bear? And importantly, in terms of whatever the channel function is, you know, can we do it in-house? Should we do it in-house? Or
Should
can we
outsource?
exactly, or should we outsource,
Which one
right?
is
These are fundamental
more
questions,
beneficial?
right? Fundamental questions. Or indeed, do we even need to have a, you know, a separate channel? You know, these are all key questions. So therefore, at the end of the day, given everything we're talking about, there are three fundamental questions that emerge that the marketing manager has to be aware of and answer in a very specific way. First question then that the marketer needs to determine is, what is the best system that will cover the desired target market? That's the first question. The best system to cover the desired target market. Secondly, what best satisfies consumer needs and wants, their desires? What is the best system that satisfies the consumer needs and wants, right? Consistent with what I'm saying always, right? We always want to put the consumer front and center. And then the third question is, more financial, what is the best structure that offers the greatest profitability, right? So I always like to think of that very important pragmatic component. What best offers maximum profitability? So those are the three fundamental questions then that as marketers we like to ask. So to help us address these fundamental questions, we can now circle back to some of the fundamental structures and systems that we have available to us. And what did I say the two basic structures are?
Direct and indirect.
Direct and indirect, absolutely correct. And so, yeah, we have direct and indirect, the two motherhood-ish kind of systems, right? But that ain't all. There are also some variants of the two fundamental systems here. And there are two variants that we call multiple channel systems and another variant that we call a hybridized kind of a system, right? And we will talk about those and what they are. But first, let's talk more about, you know, the notion of direct and indirect and how they work. So when we talk about direct, what is direct again? It is where we have direct from the firm to the
Customer.
right? We've talked about that. Exactly. Right. So we recognize that, right? And very often we see then how the sales force, you know, we can use the sales force to do that, direct marketing efforts, you know, essentially we can also use company-owned retail outlets, right? Which are growing in popularity more now too. Company-owned retail outlets, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, they are retail, they are, you know, they
Owned by
fulfill
the
that retail function, however, they're owned by the manufacturer, by the brand, by the company, and so therefore it is really, from a functional perspective, a direct system. What about indirect? You know, we've already spoken about that, right? Here where we have various configurations of intermediaries that perform some kind of a value-added capacity in each one. So we have those indirect kind of ways. And so we realize that both systems have strengths and weaknesses, and we'll talk more about that momentarily too. We realize though that, you know, how do we choose which system? We choose which system to use based on everything we're talking about. Based on everything we're talking about, right? And so the choice is really based on all of this knowledge and applying managerial and experiential acumen to those kind of decisions, I have to say. Now, getting back to sort of what I had hinted at before, there's a major trend here in the marketplace, and that major trend is what we call disintermediation. Disintermediation. And so largely for a variety of reasons, one of the major trend is disintermediation in order to try to reduce those intermediaries, right, for a whole bunch of reasons. So disintermediation is a key thing, right? And like I said, examples of that is, as I just said, right? You look at some of the big brand manufacturers, right? Like your Levi's, your Nike, your Puma, Paderno, Samsonite, the list goes on and on and on. These major brand manufacturers, what are they trying to do? In
Cut
some
down
instances,
the middleman.
Exactly, right? So they're getting rid of that retailer. They're trying to set up their own
With their
retail
own,
outlet, company
to have
owned,
like more controls.
to connect to the consumer. That's right. And what do we call that?
Disintermediation.
Exactly. Very good. Disintermediation. So that's a major trend, right? So as managers, that's the kind of thinking we want to bring to bear. Now, armed with that, let's have a look at a nuanced variant of what we just talked about when we talk about multiple channel systems. So what are multiple channel systems? Oh, before we do that, let's talk about when is the direct approach more preferable? Well, there are several factors here that we want to recognize that would sort of point us towards direct here. Sorry. So when we talk about direct here, we realize that we would want to go direct, like Dell does to the consumer generally, though not exclusively, right? You can also go to Walmart or that kind of Dell, but generally, the initial model was very direct. So based on what? How about information? When the need on the part of the consumer for information is high, and there's a high need for information, direct is often, the way to go. And also we see it in a B2B kind of a realm too. Here in Windsor, there's a major robotic welding company called Centerline. And Centerline produces very advanced, very sophisticated worldwide. They have branches around the world, at least 6 or 7 branches around the world. And what they do is that they produce very sophisticated, advanced robotic welding systems using a variety of different types of welds and configurations for welds and that kind of a thing for assembly lines, right? So if GM opens up, as they did, a new assembly plant in Mexico, they will, tap into some of the work from Centerline, where they will set up the robotic welding for the assembly line, right? So, how about that? Are needs important there? Absolutely, direct is best. Direct from Centerline, the manufacturer, to the customer, in this case GM, for example. So that is key. So information needs are high, and consistent with that, when customization is important, right? We want to deal directly with the customer. Also, when quality is important. You don't want to build in a bunch of intermediaries. You have to maintain that quality, right? So therefore, it might be the most advantageous thing to have a winery that produces the wine sell directly to the LCBO for distribution, or to the consumer directly for consumption. Right, so direct, again, when quality is important in that regard, right? Also, when purchase orders are large, when transportation is complex, and transportation becomes very complex when you're dealing with perishable goods, when you're dealing with frozen foods, and that kind of thing. Transportation becomes very, very complex in that regard. So again, direct might be preferable in that instance. So that's just what I said. Furthermore, indirect might be more appropriate. When might indirect be appropriate? Indirect might be appropriate ultimately when the consumer wants a one-stop shopping kind of a thing, right? So when I go into a Walmart, what do I want as a consumer? I don't want the inconvenience of having to go to, a grocery fruit and vegetable store to to buy fruits and vegetables. I don't want to go to a pharmacy to buy aspirin. I don't want to go to a dedicated furniture store to buy an outdoor chair. I don't want to go to a dedicated tailor to buy a t-shirt, right?
Yeah.
I don't want to go to buy a computer cable at a specialized computer, so I don't want to do all that stuff, right? What do I want? I want to go to one place,
Less
one-stop shopping.
involvement.
So therefore, what's the point here then? The point is that we want to have a retailer then that can bring in all of those suppliers,
And the needs under
that
one
retailer,
roof.
that channel member in order to do that. So therefore, build that retailer in, which is indirect,
Indirect.
and that might be appropriate in that regard, right? So that's the thinking that we bring to bear. So one-stop shopping is kind of a cliche these days, but it's worth mentioning. And further on the whole one-stop shopping aspect, we also want to recognize that, indirect, like a retailer, is important when, availability is important, right?
Yes.
Furthermore, especially when we look at the Dell model, and we will circle back and talk about this again, when we have after sales support, warranty support, and that kind of a thing, right? So do we want to physically get involved in computer repair, or do we want to just tailor the product, sell the product to the consumer, and we can outsource contract out the repair to a dedicated focus organization? Maybe that's the best way to do it, right? So yeah, indirect might be appropriate in that regard, right? So after sales becomes very important. And by the way, just as an aside, everything we're talking about here in terms of after sales, so to speak, and that kind of thing, is very important in the public sector also, right? Especially when we look at the provision of healthcare and that kind of a thing, right? Sometimes, very often in terms, and this is a hot political item in this country, provision of healthcare, sometimes it is far more cost effective to, outsource all MRIs to a MRI firm that does nothing but does MRI. They can, get the required machines, they can upkeep them, the state-of-the-art equipment, they can do all that kind of stuff.
So it's more
far
of
better
a
than
customized.
Far better,
okay.
more efficient than government can run that particular type of service for us.
Customized. Okay.
So this kind of thinking then that we're trying to convey has far-reaching implications here. So that's a key thing. So now, let us now circle back to what we said before when we talked about multiple channel systems, right? The next variant here. So fundamentally, like I've written here, it combines direct and indirect. And that will be evident momentarily when I show you a little diagram of it. Bottom line here, when we talk about multiple channel systems, the way that we can remember multiple channel versus hybrid, the way we can remember it is that here we are dealing with and focus on different consumer segments. Different consumer segments. And that will come to light in a second. That's how you remember the characteristic aspect of a multiple channel system. Of course, if we, as a supplier or manufacturer, use, different channels for different segments, that could pose problems in itself, right? In terms of management, coordinating, control, all those kind of issues, right? So those are key things that we need to recognize. So we could tend to lose control, and that could be very frustrating, right? And that is a key thing. We also recognize that some of our really desired, customers might purchase from other channels, right? So that's a key concern. So what does it look like? Well, let's have a look at, this kind of a schematic here. And here we're looking at it, simply put, we can superimpose the whole example of Loblaw on this. Now, you know that Loblaw in this country is a major corporation, and under the Loblaw corporate umbrella resides a whole variety of different businesses, not the least of which are
PC Optimum,
Shoppers Drug Mart,
Shoppers Drug Mart,
Loblaw's,
Lowe's Basics,
No Frills,
Canadian Tire.
Loblaw's, Zehrs, Real Canadian Superstore. You know, in Quebec, you know, there are Maxis, Bovago, you know, Value Mart. They're all owned by Loblaw. So, when we look at sort of the no frills kind of way, this is sort of the low cost kind of a channel that they would operate with, like your no frills or your maybe Real Canadian Superstore. And at the opposite end, you have more of a full service kind of outlet, like your Zehrs, for example, which is full service, right? And so at each one of those, the low cost really focuses and targets consumers like me, highly price sensitive consumers, right? Lower price, lower service, you know, maybe, you know, reduced service, whatever, but you know what? It helps consumers who are price sensitive to make those purchases, right? Conversely, we have the opposite end where we have, you know, full service where those consumers are service sensitive. They want to enjoy
focused on the
services and
quality
great products and that kind of, and they are willing to pay for it, so they're not very price sensitive. And those are like your Zehrs kind of customers, right? So we have examples of that. So what are we saying here? Two different and sort of a mix. You have arguably two different segments here that are supported by two different indirect channels, right? So that's a key thing. Let's have a look at the third variant here, which is what we call a hybrid system. And a hybrid system is where we have complementary functions that really are very often dedicated to the same customer. So where in the last example we saw different segments, different customers, here we're talking about the same segment, the same customers, but different channels will offer different services to that same segment. And that's what we're trying to capture here. So therefore, there are specializations that can occur, you know, it allows for specialization, it allows that kind of level of performance improvement and that kind of thing, right? And so we see then that is alive and well here. So what does that look like? Well, you could have something like this. You could have a manufacturer or supplier here that, you know, might use their own sales force, a specialized component there, channel there. They could use an outside kind of distributor, you know, like a retailer. And, you know, there could be some after-sales kind of specialists here. And like I said, we could superimpose the whole Dell model on this also, right? You know, Dell has that direct, where they sell directly, but Dell also distributes via major retailers like your Walmart, your Costco, like your Best Buy, et cetera, Dell does. And like I said, Dell also doesn't normally get involved in actual service aspects themselves, rather they will contract that out. So all for the same customer, and that's what we call a hybrid system. So that's how you can remember the difference between the two. So let us talk about now, when we look at sort of the interchange, if you will, between these channels, let us consider this very important notion that we call power. Unfortunately, like I said, textbooks don't really talk about it, but it is very important. Let me set this little example up for you. Let's say, for example, I am a toy manufacturer in Windsor, Ontario, and I have a fairly small, though sizable toy operation. Let's say, 75,000 square foot operation where I make stuffed toys, stuffed animals, say. What would I like to do in terms of my distribution? Would I like to get that into a major retailer, get contracts for a major retailer, and get my stuff produced and out there? Of course I would, sure. So what do I do then? What do? I go to, Seattle, make the whole sales pitch to Costco buyers, and say 6 or 8 or 10 months later, they contact me and say, hey, I really like what you are selling, we will take an order for this number of thousand for this one, this for that, this for that, this for that. We want delivery, here's the schedule of delivery that we would need it, over the next year, this is how we will work it, and furthermore, this is what we will pay you for it. So what do I do? As a small operation, can I really negotiate with these guys? Not really. My negotiation skills, my negotiation power is very, very limited here. I don't have much to do. If I want to play with the big boys, I need to play with their rules, right? So that means then that there are two key words here that we use a lot. One is what we call a price taker. What am I? I am a price taker. And we also have a price setter. They are the price setter. Why is that? Because they have the power. So when we talk about power, what is it? It really is the ability here for one channel member to get another channel member to do something that ordinarily they would not do. That's what power is. And so I just gave you an example of it. So therefore, when we recognize that, coordination has to occur. We need to sort of coordinate that kind of, sales volume and that kind of thing, right? So those are key aspects associated with that. So coordination is very, very important in that regard. So we also realize that there are a lot of influencing factors then that impact which channel member really has the power. So what influences what channel member really has the power? How about something like, and I just gave you this example, how about sales volume? Sales volume has a huge role to play, right? How about how the product is perceived by customers, right? If customers really love my product, they are desperate to get my product, well, invariably, I as a manufacturer, that gives me some modicum of power, right? How about switching costs? If I am producing something very, very rare that a retailer or another channel member wants, what does that do? That gives me power. Right?
Exclusivity.
It's very, very rare. Why? Because, the retailer
everybody
can't
is
switch to somebody else. I'm the only show in town.
Yeah.
So that gives me power in that regard, right? And switching costs have a role to play there in that regard. Also from a strategic perspective, there could be another element of power here, and that is the threat of backward vertical integration, right? So, and I realize this will not, this is not really a realistic example, but I'll say it anyway, just to demonstrate the principles here. I just set up this example whereby I said that, I'm a toy manufacturer, a fairly small toy manufacturer, but sizable. I'm selling to Costco. What is the threat here? The threat then is that Costco, what I do, and they want to take over, they might take me over. Right? They might take me over. What is that backward? vertical integration. And that's a threat, right? That is a threat in some circumstances. So that's another key thing that influences power, you know. If they were taking over, they have a lot of power, you know, possibly. Another aspect that's important here, and we'll talk about this again, is what we call sort of the power and just the sheer size and scope of some of the major retailers that exist out there. I mean, if we look at something like your Walmarts, your Home Depots, your Costco, these are major operations here, right?
Yeah.
And so accordingly then, they are what we call, these mega retailers
Mega
are very often
retailers.
what we call category
Category
killers.
killers.
Category killer. Category killer. So what is a category killer? I think I mentioned this in a previous class. What is a category killer? It's basically a retailer that dominates an industry. So they are especially deadly here in terms of their power and their threat. So what would be an example of something like that? How about something like within, you know, the office supply
Staples.
retail industry, something like your Staples, right? Absolutely. Or Office Depot in the U.S. And something like the, you know, your everyday consumables, something like your Walmart. How about, you know, home improvement and hardware, something like your Home Depot, Lowe's. These are category killers, right? Which have a huge role to play. So if I was interested in getting into setting up a store, let's say, you know, 100,000 square foot operation dedicated for home improvement and hardware in Windsor, Ontario, would you say on the surface, would you say, yeah, that's a good idea, there's a real opportunity for that? Or would you say, you better think about that? What would you say? Hey, you better think about it, right? Why? Because of category killers.
Category killers.
There's no way, you know, in the scenario that I described, no way I could survive, right? Why? Because of the category killers. So these are particularly powerful, and largely, you know, when we talk about channel power, you know, some of these major category killers and mega retailers, are they, you know, are they soft?
No.
Do they play hardball tactics?
Yes, absolutely.
Absolutely, that's the way they roll. They don't care. They couldn't care less about the small guy.
Small businesses, yeah.
Business, right? That's the way it is, you know? So yeah, they couldn't care less. So do they play hardball tactics? Absolutely.
Absolutely.
So getting back to that scenario, if I said, yeah, but you know, I'm gonna need, you know, you're gonna have to come back better with that next, with this potential contract. I need like 25% more. You know what they will tell me? They will basically go like this to me. That's what they do to me.
Yeah.
You know? And then I'll say, okay, walk out the door with my tail between my legs after signing the contract, right? Hardball tactics, that's the way it works. Let's talk about OEM a little bit here. The key thing to remember when we talk about OEM is original equipment manufacturer. The OEM marketing. The thing to remember when we talk about OEM here is this. And that is, as we recognize and superimpose our thinking here of channels of distribution, we realize that sellers, manufacturers use ingredient parts in the manufacturing for their products. Stellantis here in Windsor, you know, for their Grand Caravans, which bear the banner of Chrysler, you know, they will take, whatever, 2 million, or whatever it is, 3 million individual parts at the front end of the manufacturing process, and at the back end, the Grand Caravan will roll off the assembly, right? So there are a lot of parts here. So the question is, broadly speaking, what about brand recognition? Do any of these individual component parts for the final branded product receive any brand recognition? Yes or no?
No.
Absolutely not. They don't. generally speaking. I'm not talking about a little Sony kind of a radio or, pocket carbon speakers or anything. I'm talking about general, right? No brand recognition is given, right? Seagate hard drive, right? Into the HP or the hard drive of, Dell computers. Do they give any recognition of Seagate or no?
No.
Or A&P for Michael? No, right? And why is that? Those are unique components into the final branded product, right? And so that is the essence of what OEM is all about. Now, the name, and this has sort of evolved over the last 15, 20 years. So it gets a little confusing sometimes, but I will make it simple for you. When we as to where we are right now, the name has sort of evolved over the last 15, 20 years. But when we talk about, I mentioned, Stellantis or Chrysler here, the Chrysler manufacturer. The Chrysler manufacturer that uses all of those ingredient components that they receive unbranded is known as the OEM. So the OEM is that organization that uses unbranded components. And then the supplier supplies stuff. And that is the essence of OEM. It used to be the opposite. Years ago, the term sort of meant something different, but it sort of evolved over time to where we are right now. I'm telling you what it is right now. You do not write this down, but years ago, like about 15, 20 years ago, OEM used to refer to that supplier, the original equipment manufacturer, supplying to Chrysler. That used to be that whole terminology sort of shifted over the last while. So OEM is, Chrysler. So if, for example, I want to get a new component for my Suzuki motorcycle, for example, if I want to get a new component for it, I could say, okay, go to the guy and say, okay, well, what is this? I need a part for this. Can I get an OEM part, which is made by, the original equipment manufacturer like Suzuki? Or can we get an aftermarket part? Or for, my Ford truck, of which I have a few. In fact, I faced this very question like 2 days ago. The new part. First question I asked the technician was, okay, can we get this part from an aftermarket third party, which is cheaper than OEM, or do we need to get
the OEM.
OEM part? So that, in essence, is what OEM is all about. Now, when we talk about OEM marketing, it goes without saying that it's very technical. It requires engineers talking to engineers. Things have to be spec'd out very carefully. They're usually big orders in terms of order, volume. All these kind of things are involved in OEM marketing. So accordingly, when we do this, it requires a lot of negotiation skills to negotiate prices for these products and right, in order to build in a beneficial, mutually beneficial kind of financial structure, right? And so, we often see then that ultimately, price is a key thing, right? Sales will be driven by price. So that is the essence of what OEM marketing is all about. And there's a whole thing, we could talk for hours on OEMs and how OEMs work and that kind of thing. And in fact, when we talk about that, we get involved in, tier 1 suppliers and tier 2 suppliers for OEMs, and it's a whole thing, right? Which we won't get into here. In contrast, hang in there for a little while and then we'll take a break here. But in contrast to OEMs, we also have another thing that we want to sort of recognize, and that is what we call VARs, right? VAR, value added resellers. So here's the thing, when we talk about value added resellers, in contrast to OEMs, value added resellers sell products that do receive brand recognition. And so typically the way that works is that the value-added reseller will attain these branded products, compile them together for an overall solution. You know, and for each of those components, appropriate brand recognition would be given. That essentially is what a value-added reseller is all about. So, for example, I always like to give this example, and that is, you know, a friend of mine who used to work at a major computer value-added reseller in London, Ontario, called StarTech.com. What they do is that they basically sell solutions for computers, right? So you can buy a bunch of peripherals for computers, you know, both business and consumer market. So, you know, for a particular system, you might need a cable, kind of a plug, and a this and that, and this and that. So they will package them together and sell that to the customers, right? And that's what they do, StarTech.com. So what is that? They are a value-added reseller. So typically, in relation to a lot of other manufacturers, for example, with input, you know, parts, typically fewer suppliers for added resellers like that, and the whole notion of partnership becomes very important there too. The last major topic area here before we get into retailing that I want to talk about is what we call a gray market. A gray market. Gray market. So the first question we want to sort of say to ourselves is, well, what exactly is a gray market? Well, gray market, very interesting. This whole domain, a lot of good research has been done as we continue to seek to understand more about it. But fundamentally, a gray market is, first of all, not to be confused with a black market. When we talk about a black market, what is that? That's basically when I approach you on the subway and I say, what would you like? You know, stolen goods, in other words, black market, illegal, breaching the regulatory framework against the law, right? Or, hey, you want to buy some heroin? That is a black market, right? Really, gray market is not like that at all. Generally, it's legal. There's no breach of formal rules and laws. Fundamentally, when we talk about a gray market, basically a gray market arises when a seller, the retailer, will sell branded goods for which they are not authorized sellers. They're not authorized by the brand owner to sell the brand. Doesn't mean they can't sell it, but they're just not authorized sellers. Well, let me give you an example of this. You know, I like Seiko watches. So quite a few years ago, I had this sort of major kick where I was interested in Seiko watches. And so over the span of a few years, I bought a few. And when I priced them in North America, they were quite priced. However, online, I found a seller online. I think they're based, I can't remember, Hong Kong or Singapore. One of the, I can't quite remember. Probably Singapore, I think. But anyway, major reseller, so you can look it up. It's called Creation Watches. They sell branded, top-end branded watches at very substantially discounted prices. Are they new? Absolutely. Nothing wrong with them. They're not secondary. It's all good. It's all, you know, square and even and good and upright. Right? However, what are they? Most people don't. Most people don't. I know exactly what they're called. What is it? They are gray market
Resellers.
How does the gray market work? Well, typically, they can be very beneficial. So don't think that gray market is bad. Don't frame it in terms of bad or good. Just frame it in terms of how goods can be sold in various ways. So, you when we talk about a gray market, what will happen very often is that an authorized, the brand holder, an authorized seller of that brand could attain a surplus of inventory for whatever reason. So they could have like 500 units of this, 600 of that, 50 of that, 75 of that. For whatever reason, they want to unload that inventory in order to get presumably new inventory in. Right? They want to unload it. Right? And so what will that holder, an authorized holder, what will they do? They will sell it to a gray market dealer who in turn will take it, pass that discount on to them, and they sell it to the consumer. So this is especially prevalent in international contexts. I gave you an example of the gray market, creation watches, little advertisement for it, little sales going, it's a good organization, very happy. Mailed it in and all came under, and I still, I never took advantage of it, but I did receive warranty support. However, that's one of the problems with gray markets. There are problems from a consumer perspective with gray markets. One of the problems from a consumer perspective is that it might compromise the consumer's ability to obtain warranty coverage. That's a potential problem. So warranty after sales might be compromised, might be. From a business perspective and a branding perspective, what do you think the potential problem is here? Well, I think that's always a problem, yeah. But we're talking about gray markets here.
Brand perception might shift.
We're not talking about other counterfeit brands. We're talking about the real brands here in this context. What?
Like,
Perceptions, yeah.
Yeah.
So I mean, the problem here is that selling a major brand, say at a lower price than regular retail pricing, could dilute the brand. Dilute the brand.
Equity.
That's a potential problem, right? The consumer might not look at it in the same way because price is an important attribute. So these are problems, right? So, but generally it's they're used, and that's what it is. So again, what is it? It's basically where we have branded or trademarked goods that are sold through channels of distribution that are not authorized by the holder of the trademark. So that is a potential problem, and that could, like I said, some of those problems exist, and it could lead to conflict among channel members like that. So at this point, this is probably a good time to take a 10-minute break. So let us take 10 minutes. We will resume here at 25 to 3, 9 minutes, 25 to 3, and we will be talking about so those utilities, those benefits.
Second half.
Product defining, the form, the volume, all those utilitarian useful things, right? That's really the value. In other words, like I said, I go to a Walmart, I do like maybe 1 to twice a week, and I can just get 1 to 2 items here, another item there, and another one there. I don't need to run around to different specialty shops all over Windsor to get what I want. I can just go one spot to take time. I don't have to buy big pallets of stuff. I don't have to buy big bids of things if I want the product form. So it's all about that usefulness thing. That's the real value that accrues to the consumer. It's all based on utilitarian kind of aspects like that. And by the way, it bears repetition too. Here in this context, whenever we use the word value, the value is for, I can't remember what it was, but when we talk about value, what is value again? Remind me? Anyone? Yeah.
Benefit divided by cost.
Yeah.
No, sorry, it's passive benefits over cost.
Yes, that's right, Moshe. Correct. Benefits over price.
Yeah.
That's right. benefits over price. So I get that, say, Toyota Corolla for $2,000, high benefits, low price, high value, right?
Yep.
But if I get a Toyota Corolla benefits for $100,000, benefits small, denominator, price big,
Big.
small number, less than one.
Less low value.
That's how we want to think of value. That's clear? So fundamentally, in a general sense, then, value that accrues to the consumer as offered and delivered by the retailer is utilitarian in nature, right? Primarily, as I have just described. So that's a key thing to remember here as we build up our thinking and understanding of retailing. So as we sort of jump into this whole domain of retailing, then the question becomes, how can we think of retailing again as we build up our knowledge and our feel for this thing? How can we think of it? We can think of retailing essentially as being the merchandising aspect of marketing. So here's a key word to use a lot in marketing and business, merchandising. So what is merchandising all about? So I am making the claim here that retailing is the merchandising aspect of marketing. Retailing is the merchandising aspect of marketing. So what is merchandising all about? Simply put, it is merchandising. It is fundamentally about how we make the product available to the right consumer at the right time in the right location. That's what merchandising ultimately is all about. So from a retail perspective, that entails getting the product, getting it ready, shelving it, signing it accordingly, appropriately pricing it, and making it available for the consumer. That's what merchandising is all about. So that might sound somewhat trite, but I mean, from a retail perspective, that's a big deal, right? Because for major retailers, how do they get products? Well, they come in typically, big plasticized, shrink wrapped pallets in boxes. So what do? You guys get involved in any of the backroom stuff, or do you do work in the front, cash and that kind of stuff? Yeah, which Walmart do you work at? Google? How about you guys? All Google? Okay. I go in there rarely, like maybe once every 3 months. I'm heavy burden. At any rate, what was I saying now? I got a sidetracked by you guys. In your Walmart employment. Well, what do you do then? What do you do?
I'm a fashion assistant.
Oh, fashion. Oh, fashion assistant. Oh, I should go to you for fashion advice?
Well, it's not very nice product.
I don't know. For cost effective, for cost sensitive kind of guy, for charity much, it's good for me. I don't care about any of that. Where you sell? Hey? What? Sorry, I can't even hear you. What? Store standard? What does that mean? Oh, I see. Okay. So you know how to run the cash and cards and gift cards, all that kind of stuff, right? You guys don't get involved in like breaking, as we call it, breaking the product, right? Taking the plasticized wrap off and getting it ready to do that. So at any rate, getting back to the topic at hand, I mean, that is a key thing, right? So they come in and shrink wrapped pallets, big pallets that are shrink wrapped, and then take all that out, take it out of the box, take it individual things, put it on the shelf, make sure the signage is all right, all that kind of stuff, right? Make sure that it's all, all that kind of stuff, right? So that is all merchandise, right? And so as I mentioned to you before, we recognize then that when we talk about retailing, it really is that last channel where the product meets the consumer. That's how we want to think of that last channel in channels of distribution where the product meets the consumer. It consists of all of those activities, merchandising oriented, all of those activities that are involved in doing all that. So there's a lot going on here. And so usually, the retailer then is focused on those sales for personal and non-business consumption, right? Usually for personal use, and that's the key thing, you know, or not for business, right? So that's usually, like I said, I'll say it again, it's usually for personal or household, family usage. So therefore, if we recognize then that it's all about the consumer, it is worth reminding ourselves then, what about the consumer? What about the consumer? Well, we realize some key things here. I'm repeating myself. When we talk about the consumer, we realize that what is fundamental to us doing our work as marketers, we need to put the consumer at the front and center of everything we do. And to do that, we need to thoroughly understand the consumer. As I'm always saying, as Steve Jobs said, right? What benefits can we bring to the consumer, as Jobs said? So therefore, we recognize then that the consumer is more demanding now than ever before. The consumer has instantaneous access to all the information that they could possibly need and want, generally speaking. So what does that mean? That means then that retailers have to recognize that and service the consumer accordingly. And so, you know, the retailer has to react to those demands of the consumer. And that represents a bit of a problem, because when the retailer acts and provides that service and does that for the consumer, the problem here is that when the retailer does that and provides that service to the consumer, there is a cost associated with the provision of that service. There's a cost to the retailer associated with the provision of that value to the customer. So what does that mean then? Well, most retailers, I would suggest, would love to double or triple the sales staff on the floor. They would love to do that, right? But they do that, and that comes with a very substantial additional cost to them. So very often it becomes somewhat cost prohibitive to do that. So the point here that I'm making is that, yeah, you want to do all this for the consumer, but you have to balance out the cost associated with that, right? And that's the problem, especially given the very demanding nature of shoppers now who are becoming smarter. They do not want to pay more for one brand at one location where they can get that same brand at another location for a lower price. So that is a key thing. Now, as we sort of step away a little bit from the consumer and we look at outlets here, we sort of touched on this before, there are different ways by which we can classify these retail outlets. Fundamentally, there are three major ways that we can look at to help us classify these outlets based on either ownership or service rendered or the stuff that they sell, the merchandise line. So if we look at the first one, what are some of the potential ownership configurations that exist out there? Well, there are independent retail operations, so they're independent outlets. There are corporate chains that are centrally owned. And thirdly, there are contractual systems. Those are the three major kinds of ownership configurations. Now, when we talk about contractual systems, we talked about this before, right at the outset. What did I say about H&R Block? It is a contractual system that we call a franchise operation. Right, franchise operation, which is quite important. I mean, how does a franchise work? Well, a franchise Franchisee will purchase a franchise from the franchisor. The franchisor will sell a franchise to a franchisee. The franchisee will pay for that franchise. There'll be typically, your normal template is that there'll be an outflow of cash. They will buy that. And then moving forward, based on some metric, either profitability, gross profitability, or revenue, or sales, they will render unto the franchisor a fee. And that fee, usually over a period of time, usually monthly, is what we call a franchise fee. And in return for that fee, they will retain usage of the branded materials, branded, supplies, the template, the branded template for the operation, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, right? So franchises. Another way that we can look at outlets are by service. So what do you think the three major levels of service are? How about you fill up your gas with car, you go out and you pump it yourself, what do you call that? Self-service. Conversely, at the opposite end of self-service is what? How about full service? So you go to a tailor, and the tailor will measure you and select everything and do everything for you, right? What is that?
Full service.
And then we have something in between, which is what we call limited service, right? So when I go to a Walmart or a Home Depot and I ask, a guy at Home Depot plumbing, what about this? What do you recommend for that? What's blah, blah, blah? He'll give me advice on how to do, what is that? Limited service, right? So typically we have those three main kind of approaches to classifying outlets as far as service goes. And the third major way that we can classify service is to look at the stuff they sell, i.e. merchandise line. So here in this context, there are two words that are very important, right, within the retail marketing context. And the first word is what we call assortment. So what is assortment? Here is the way to remember assortment. When we use the word assortment, think product line. Think product line, right? Think product line. So what would that look like? Wide assortment, many product lines, narrow assortment, few product lines. So take, for example, this. I always like to give this, this example. And that is a shoe store. A shoe store. Shoe store, let's accept for argument's sake then, that the shoe store is a single product category. And within that product category of shoes, they sell a whole lot of different types of shoes, different product lines. We've spoken about this before when we talked about the product hierarchy, right? So we have product category, and then we have a bunch of lines, product lines under that category, right? So we have our shoe store with a whole lot of different product lines that could be along the lines of formal footwear, casual footwear, sports, running, basketball, hiking,
trails.
safety. All those are all different product lines under that product category. Okay, in this context. In other words, many product lines, wide assortment. Now, another word that we want to be very clear about here is this word that we call variety. So where assortment is connected in your mind with product lines, variety is connected with product categories. Wide variety, many product categories. Narrow variety, only a few product categories. So the shoe store that I gave you, narrow variety, basically just one product category. However, when I go to Walmart, I can, like I said, get a shirt, a computer cable, I can get a bottle of aspirins, I can get an apple, and I can get some frozen foods and buy some cream for coffee, right? Those are all within different product categories. Or an outdoor chair, right? Different product categories. Walmart, the Bay, major box stores like that. Many product categories, wide variety. Got it? So that is just a bit of definitional motherhoodish kind of terminology that we use to help us understand this kind of thing. Now, as we recognize that then and drill into this notion then of retailing a bit more, we should recognize up front that, you know what, not all retail outlets then are bricks and mortar, not all are stores. There are many different types of non-store forms of retailing. It wasn't, we were talking about going to Dubai, right? A few years ago, quite a few years ago now, I was in Dubai and I was struck at how, you know, there were so many automatic vending machines at the airport. And in these automatic vending machines, you could buy an iPad, an iPhone, you could buy a watch, you could buy a bottle of booze, you could buy all kinds of stuff out of these auto vending machines. So auto vending machine, that is a form of retailing in itself. And yeah, we have direct mail, we have TV, you can buy stuff off the TV, all of that online, telemarketing, there's direct selling, all that, right? So don't fixate and think that retailing has to be a store per se. So there are a variety of shapes and sizes associated with this thing we call retailing. Now, in order to help us understand the overall landscape of retailing, I like to introduce this to my students. And again, this comes from Michael Pierce at Ivy, my alma mater. And what Michael has sort of developed is what he called the retail value proposition. And it's a beautiful, simple little framework, and it helps us to understand how retail really works. And by the way, you know, whenever I give a media interview to a reporter on the TV or radio or print or whatever, they often will ask me different things about different market events and things, right? And many times it's all retail oriented. And so when I am explaining some of the stuff to Joe Public through the media, it helps to use this in the back of my mind. So I keep this little framework in the back of my mind when I explain this, and it helps me explain and organize my thoughts. So what is it? Basically, when we talk about the retail value proposition, is that it consists of 4 major dimensions: selection, experience, convenience, and price. Those are the 4 major dimensions of the retail value proposition. So I'll say that again, don't worry, we'll go over all that. So basically then, when we talk about the retail value proposition, which consists of those 4 major dimensions: selection, experience, convenience, and price, we recognize that broadly, when we talk about the retail value proposition, it's really the value offering that the retailer delivers to the consumer. It's the package of benefits that the retailer delivers. The package of benefits really that the retailer delivers. So when we look at retail value proposition here, we see that there are, you know, about, a couple of key words here that we should attend to. First of all, again, we see that word value, which is embedded in there. So right off the bat, as soon as we see value, what do we think? Moshe, tell me again.
Benefits over price.
Exactly. So we recognize that. So right off the bat, we're thinking arithmetically, right? We're thinking benefits over price. Price occupies that very prominent denominator position in most things, right? So we have price at the denominator. So that's basically how we want to think of value. Furthermore, we also see another word, and that is value proposition, right? What is a value proposition? We can think of a value proposition is the promise, broad promise that we offer our consumers. So you come into my Home Depot and I promise you that you will have access to a very broad array of products. You will have access to some expertise and recommendations, and you'll be able to enjoy warranty support and after-sales support if you don't like it. And what is that? That's a promise that I am offering the consumer. That is my. And by the way, if you graduate and if you, move into some kind of a position, and if you are involved in, business plan or marketing plan formulation, a value proposition, a very important statement to embed in your business plan. It shows the potential investor what your business is all about. So value proposition is important. So that is key. So now, when we talk about the retail value proposition, just like channels of distribution, is this something that is static, cast in concrete, never ever to change? No, absolutely not.
Dynamic.
It should absolutely be fluid, right? Namely that as consumer tastes and needs and wants and attitudes shift, and as societal attitudes shift, so too should the retail value proposition. And those retailers that are successful in doing this, they are winners. They are winners. They succeed, generally speaking. Furthermore, when we look at that, we also realize that when we look at the retail value proposition, the retail value proposition is built around consumer needs. Okay, this is a point here. The retail value proposition is built around consumer needs with the consumer front and center. Okay? We see then that those retailers who are successful in the marketplace, those real winners that excel, they tend to focus in on one or several of these dimensions as a strategic point of emphasis here. Dollarama, right? Our dollar shop, my favorite store, Dollar Shop, right? What do you think they focus on? Low price, absolutely. How about something like your Home Depot? This is kind of tricky. What do they focus on?
Selection and convenience.
I would say they really, really focus on all of them, but they really, really focus on all three, I would say. And arguably price too. But they really focus on the top three, I would say, to a large extent. So we get that, right? So again, the key point here is that all retailers must deliver aspects associated with all of these dimensions, but those real winners tend to compete based on, an emphasis, a strategic emphasis of one or several of these. So let's have a look at the first one. Let's have a look at selection. So here, again, we're reiterating some fundamental terminology again. When we look at selection, again, we're talking about the stuff that is being sold in the retail outlet, right? Are you with me here? Right, so then how do we look at it? First one, we can approach it by way of either one of all of these. We can approach it by variety. And what did I say variety was? Okay? What?
Product category.
Product categories. Walmart, many product categories, wide variety, right?
Variety.
So Walmart really focuses on
Variety and category.
variety, right? How about breadth? What is breadth? When we talk about breadth here, think assortment, which is product lines. Am I right? Am I right or am I wrong?
Yeah.
Right? So
Right.
breadth
Product
is about
lines.
assortment, and assortment is about
Product lines.
right. Okay, and then the last thing, and I've already explained that, so I won't repeat myself. And then, of course, we have depth, which is a third aspect associated with selection. And depth speaks to commitment to inventory. So when I walk into, a Walmart, and I see like, a particular type of a T-shirt, George, this is George, isn't it, or no? George, yeah, George T-shirt, and I see, 150 green, large George T-shirts sitting on the shelf. That's a pretty large inventory, very deep. So depth is about the commitment to inventory, and so really then, further on that, those organizations, those retailers that focus on selection, they tend to employ some key strategies here. They could sort of seek to dominate the industry and dominate the market. And here, when we talk about those retailers that dominate the market, we're talking about those category killers, right? Like Toys R Us and like we talked about before. So that's one strategy. Be a big player, dominate the market. That's a strategy based on selection. Furthermore, many of them also offer what we call proprietary products. And here, when we talk about proprietary products, we're talking about those brands that are owned by the retailer. That's what proprietary products are here. So you go into your Costco, and what brand do you see? We go into your Walmart, what brand do you see? We've named one on the clothing side. What other ones do we see in Walmart? Great Value, yeah. When we go into Canadian Tire, what do we see for tools? Mastercraft tools, right? It is Mastercraft, isn't it? Yeah, Mastercraft tools, Canadian Tire. How about when we go to a Real Canadian Superstore? What is one of the major, or Shoppers, what do we see? Yep, absolutely, which is all the proprietary product owned by Loblaw. So yeah, absolutely. So selection is a key thing, right? Furthermore, in addition to selection, we also have experience, right? And so the notion here, when we talk about experience, is that the overall experience with the consumer is something that has to be carefully nurtured and managed, by the way, but the overall experience transcends the simple transaction. So yeah, the consumer wants to buy, a quart of milk, or they want to get their oil change, yes, but the overall experience is bigger than all that. It has to do with relationship management, which is key, and that's what we want to do in marketing. We want to build those relationships.
Yeah.
Ideally, we want to build long-term relationships. So there are two ways by which retailers can focus in on experience, and they can provide care to the consumer. And what is care? Care is about providing that useful information, that advice, it's that personal attention, value-added services. That's what care is all about. So we could also, the retailer could also provide more entertainment. And when we talk about entertainment here, it's about those retailers that provide those sensory diversions, that entertainment value to the consumer, sensory stimulation, that kind of a thing. So you have, music playing in the background, you have fancy paint, colors, things on the floor, fancy sound, all that kind of stuff, right? What is that? It's all about entertainment. So we that. The third dimension is what we call convenience. And fundamentally, when we talk about convenience, it's all about trying to enable the consumer to shop with a minimal time and minimal effort. That's what convenience is all about. And so we see then that those real winners in the marketplace that focus on convenience, they really, can focus on accessibility, and accessibility is time. Accessibility is really a time-focused kind of a thing, where you have the appropriate location, whether it's bricks and mortar or online. So, accessibility is based on location, layout, hours of operation, all about providing that accessibility to the consumer. And or speed, which is related, of course. Speed, the ability then of the consumer to move in, through, and out the retail outlet. Speed, how fast can it happen? You want to build in speed. You don't want to, generally you want to facilitate that speed for the consumer, right? Check out initiatives and that kind of thing also. Delivery, layout, drive-through possibly, available staff. All that stuff contributes to speed. And then lastly, we have price. Price is key, right, always. But, when we look at price, broadly, there's always that debate in marketing related to price as to what is more beneficial and what is more impactful. EDLP, everyday low price, or periodic discounts. What is more effective? What is better? Well, it's a debate. There's no answer to it, right? It depends. If you look at Canadian Tire, for example, Canadian Tire has weekly discounts, right? They come out in the flyers on a weekly basis. It's part of the whole thing, part of the whole Canadian Tire brand, I would suggest, right? People look forward to the weekly discounts and that kind of thing. So they would say periodic discounts like that is the way to go, right? Whereas, Walmart or Basics or Home Depot or Lowe's, they are more leaning towards what we call an EDLP, an everyday low price kind of strategy. So price is an important thing. Bottom line here is that when we talk about price, how do retailers who focus in on price, which is low price, how do they really generate their money? How do they maximize their revenue? Well, it's about that. It's all about revenue maximization. It's all about sales. High sales is low price. That's how they do it. Like yours. It's all of that. Right? So there are those, and that's what's going on. So getting back to what I said before, I'll ask you again, when we talk about value, value is what again?
Benefits over price.
Price again is always occupying that very prominent place in the denominator. And so when we look at our retail value proposition from a ratio and arithmetic perspective, what do we see? We see this kind of a scenario here, right? Bottom line here, selection, experience, convenience over price. So that's how we can set it up. SEC, SEC over P. And here we have, again, we have a reiteration of the point that the retail value proposition should change in response to changing markets. Price-oriented kinds of, let me just go back just to put a point on one thing that we should have said in the context about. When we talk about price-focused retailers, retailers that focus on price come in a variety of shapes and sizes. There are those retailers that we can call, for lack of a better term, we can call them wholesalers or wholesale clubs or warehouse clubs. And what are we talking about here? What are we talking about here? A warehouse club? Like a Costco. Right? Yeah. And they absolutely are all about low price. Yeah, largely. So that's one kind of form. We also have another form that we call a deep discounter. A deep discount. Deep discounters. And what is that? That is like our Dollarama or Dollar Tree. A deep discounter is like a Dollarama, a Dollar Tree kind of a thing. And so the characteristic here with a deep discounter is that, here's the key thing, they will purchase their inventory at regular wholesale prices, but they will accept reduced margins on those products when they sell them to consumers. So they'll buy them, but they'll price them low, still make money, they'll price them low, sell them to consumers, right? Again, high volume, low price, they generate revenue that way. What do we call that? A deep discounter. Another form that stands in nuanced contrast to that is what we call a off-pricer. An off-pricer. And an off-pricer will sell stuff low price too, but an off-pricer though will purchase their inventory at, here's the point, lower than regular wholesale prices, lower than regular wholesale prices, and pass on those low prices to their consumers. And that is what we call what do we call that? Off-pricer. Exactly. And an example of that is sort of like your winners, for example, right? Winners. And that's why, inventories are always shifting in like your winners, right? You can get a particular name brand there tonight, but in a week you won't get it, you'll get something else, right? Why? Because they just take advantage of those available inventories, they take advantage of it, buy it lower than regular wholesale prices, pass on with it. That's the nature of winners, right? And buy rate. Yeah, so you have these kind of things, and then you have like liquidators, and liquidators typically sell pre-used inventory, like your Finds and your Value Village and like your, what's another secondhand store type of thing? Goodwill, that kind of thing. Right. Okay, so let's talk a little bit before we get into personal selling here. Let's talk a little bit quickly about the overall state of Canadian retailing. So as we sum up here our treatment of retailing, we recognize some key things here. And that is that, first of all, from a macroeconomic perspective, retailing is very important. It forms a huge component of our overall macro Canadian economic functioning. Over a quarter, which is a big chunk of our GDP, is derived from retailing, which is very substantial. And furthermore, we recognize that, almost half of our GDP invariably arises from consumer spending. So these are key things, right? So from a policy-making perspective, guys like me say, you know what, you really want to stimulate the economy, what you really need to do then is to keep prices low, put more money into the pockets of the consumer. Why? Because they spend it. And when they spend it, it stimulates the economy and then things get good, generally speaking. So we realize that. We also realize that, most retail outlets are small business. 72% of retail outlets are small business employing 5 or fewer employees. So, almost 3/4 of all retailers are very small operations, right? It's only a few that are like our big box kind of retailers that we're talking about. So that goes a little counterproductive, or counterintuitive, but that's what it is. But it is a major source of employment, right? 75% of employment really within the manufacturing sector is from non-service, is from small business, right? So if you want to stimulate the economy, think small business. That's really where employment is, and that is key. We also realize that, in terms of trends, new trends that are emerging in the retail sector, there are some key identified trends, one of which, especially for those price-sensitive consumers, there are more discount houses, low price kind of operations that are emerging now and are doing quite well. And also we see, not really related to low price, but certainly related to more merchandise lines, we see more specialty houses kind of arising, right? Specialty coffee shops, specialty tea shops, specialty clothing shops, specialty sports shops, all these kind of things that are emerging, right? Ultimately, it's about catering, especially for the big box stores, catering to the convenience of the consumer for that one-stop shopping experience, right? And that is important. And so we realize that is key. And we also recognize that, like I said, even major brand manufacturers are for themselves changing the nature of their own channels of distribution, whereby they themselves are getting into sort of the retail function themselves, as we said. So yeah, there are new forms that are emerging. Problem though in retailing is that it is a really, as I always say, a really tough environment to work in and to compete in. The competition is brutal. It is intense. There are only so many consumers out there. So therefore, you can only slice that pie so thin, right? And it is intense. However, I argue though that, those retailers that can successfully navigate all the stuff that we talked about in our course, the probability of them being successful is dramatically increased, like I say. We also see that there is, as we all know, more of a trend towards food, non-food kind of consumption. We know that technology and the use of technology is absolutely on the rise in the retail outlets, especially when it comes to, inventory management and the like. Very global in nature, as we've already spoken about. Another major trend is what we call congregation facilitators. So what is that? A major trend in retail is to try to bring the consumer in and get them to congregate together and socialize together in the retail outlet. Congregation facility. So what is that? That means having meeting rooms, chairs where they can sit. It means things like having a Starbucks co-located with your Indigo books, so the consumer can go in, grab a coffee and browse books and buy books and that kind of a thing. What is that? It is a congregation facilitator, a major trend in retail. So where do we go in the future? Well, a major trend in the future is what we call multi-channel kind of retailing. So what do we mean by that? That's when the retailer uses several channels in order to do their business. So what does that mean then in reality? That means then that I can go to a Lowe's, look for a product, they might not have it in the store, but customer service would look it up online and they'll say, oh, we don't have it here, but we can order it and we can deliver it to your house. What is that? That's a multi-channel kind of a thing, right? You're doing it bricks and mortar and you're using an electronic channel to have it delivered to your house. Or you can order it online, have it delivered to a Walmart. That's another option too. Multi-channel, so Walmart can do electronic, internet kind of channels, and they can do bricks and mortar, for example, right? So multi-channel, all relying on technology, right? And so we realize that. We also see, like I said, consumers, in terms of their behavior, are becoming more and more demanding. I remember a few decades ago in this province, Canada-wide really, but the whole notion of, say, Sunday shopping was a huge thing. Multi-year debates taking place. It all got very nasty. It was a whole thing, When I was a kid growing up, there was no Sunday shopping. Everything shut down on a Sunday, right? And gradually started, and now it's just a thing, right? It's open, it's just a given. We want to get something on Sunday, we just go and get it, right? Most stores are open. So, it's all about changing, shifting consumer behaviors and needs. And we also, just to sum up then, we also see that there is an especial importance on private label brands, as we just talked about. We love private label brands, right? In marketing, we love it. And why is that? Because typically our margins on our private label brands are larger than other more branded products. So we can enjoy higher margins on our proprietary products, which is good. We like that. So now let us end off talking a bit about, what do we want to talk about? Personal selling. So let us talk about personal selling. Personal selling. So we recognize that the salesperson has a very special mission here. The salesperson really is a key communicator with the consumer, right? It is the salesperson that really delivers the retail value proposition to the consumer. It is the salesperson that delivers the value proposition to the consumer. And so that is key. It's a very special kind of role that salespeople have, right? And at the end of the day, they try to complete that transaction and enhance sales. So that is key. And it is key because we recognize that when we talk about selling, there are several major selling situations that we want to be aware of. First one is what we call the response setting. Response setting. Response selling is essentially where the salesperson will take orders and fulfill the orders. So if you have a salesperson that goes to, works for Bauer Hockey Equipment and they go to various sports shops around Windsor, they'll talk to the respective shops, take orders, and then a month later, the orders will show up at the respective shops. What's that? Response selling. Second one is what we call trade selling situation. And that is where, yes, the salesperson will take orders, absolutely, but in addition to that, they will also help with some functions in the retail, like they will, stock the shelves, they will engage in some selling, or some displays. They'll arrange end caps and that kind of a thing within the, maybe in-aisle displays and that kind of a thing, right? For the retailer on behalf of the brand owner. And that's what we call trade selling. We also have a third situation that we call missionary. And missionary, simply put, is where the salesperson tries to influence the decision maker. So what does that look like? Well, that's used extensively in big pharma, right? The pharma sales rep will go to who? MDs or dentists and tell the MDs about the particular drugs that they want them to sell. Give them samples and say, here, try this, try that, tell them all about it in order to try to influence the MD, the physician. Right? And that's what we call missionary. We also have another type that we call more creative selling. Creative selling, really the focus here in creative selling is, as the word implies, you're trying to create new customers. Big companies will sometimes call this business development. So you're going out and you are trying to create new customers, creation. And then the last kind of selling situation is more technical, right? And so, you have technical selling situations where you have, tech salespeople who very often have PhDs and, advanced master's degrees in computer science and computer engineering and that kind of thing, and they are good at sales. So they will, provide these technical computer-based solutions to, say, governments to use, right, or big companies or that kind of thing, right? Very advanced, sophisticated type of sales, and that's technical. So the salesperson does a whole bunch of stuff, and that is some of the stuff that they will do. When we talk about organizing the salespeople, here we get involved in what we call Salesforce management. So Salesforce management and managing Salesforce is about that. It is about managing your salespeople, right? So you're talking about organizing their compensation, their performance appraisals, their goal setting, and all that kind of thing, right? So we realize then that when we talk about managing the sales force, there are a lot of things that impact your salespeople's success, So there are internal and external things that will contribute to their success, what kind of personality they have, how outgoing they are, and external things, what's happening in the economy, for example, right? Invariably, what do managers want to do to their salespeople? They want to arrange things such that performance is enhanced. And what does that mean? Selling more. Ultimately, that's the fact. So you want to try to enhance that, and that's the ultimate goal of Salesforce managers. And so we also realize that satisfaction plays a huge role in the performance of salespeople. There is a positive correlation between job satisfaction and performance. You know, and it's a chicken and the egg kind of thing, what comes first, you know? Performance or satisfaction? Well, the two are highly related. Those salespeople that are highly satisfied also are high performers, and that's true there. Now, in terms of management of the sales force, how then do we manage them from a practical perspective? We use territories. Now, when we use the word territory, it doesn't necessarily mean geographically based. Essentially, the word territory here essentially means an allocation of customers to the salesperson. That's what it is. An allocation of sales of customers, either current or potential customers, to the salesperson. Very often it's geographically based, but it doesn't necessarily have to be on geographic. But if we do use geographically, which is used very extensively, we have to be very cognizant of setting up territories geographically such that an appropriate size is used to allocate to salespeople. If you have, in a region, if you have too few territories, what does that mean? That means that the territories are, they're too few. It means that they're too big. And if they're too big, that means the salesperson is spending too much time traveling. And if that happens, they're not selling much. That's bad. Conversely, if you have in a region too many territories, that means that the territories are too small. And what does that mean? That compromises potential income for the salespeople. It could result in disputes among the salespeople as they compete for customers. It could have all kinds of issues, compromise their income, all those kind of things, right? So it is a key concern here. Ultimately, you want to effectively sort of delineate responsibilities for particular customers to salespeople, and that is a key concern here. So therefore, another kind of thing that we need to talk about then is quotas. Very important in sales, right? Quotas. What is a quota? A quota is a sales goal. That's what it is. It's an objective. And of course, it's something then that the salesperson must meet or surpass. And so we realize that it can come in a variety of shapes and sizes, right? There's different types. You can have sales-based quotas, sell 5 new units, 5 new cars every month. That's your minimum quota. Or you could have more financially based quota, which is, you know, every month we expect you to sell a minimum of $75,000 worth of product. Financially based, right, or a combination of quota. So really then, and you can have a combination of both. So those are some major types. And so what does it do? It really provides incentive for the salesperson to do their work. Furthermore, in addition to the incentive, it also provides a means of performance measurement. And that's an important thing. And also, that wasn't enough, it could also be used as a means of compensation. You know, you exceed that financial goal of $75,000 a month, and guess what? You're going to be getting a bonus of, you know, $5,000 if you sell more. So, you know, you have that kind of thing going on. So very often compensation is tied into the sales quotas. And when we talk about compensation, and you folks who are in the HR management thing will love this, we recognize that there are, and we all know these, I think, several types, right? We have a straight commission where you receive that stream of compensation. Conversely, regardless of what you sell, right, salary. Or you can have more of a commission commission-based, and a commission base is what compensation that is tied to some kind of a quota to sales, yeah. Yeah. So we can have a commission, and we all know that. You can have incentive payments, and I told you what that is, right? You surpass a particular tier and you get additional payment, right? You can also have sales contests, right? Which can be quite helpful. Like my friend Rob, who is a car salesman in Strathroy, Ontario, right? Rob is always winning sales contests that GM sets up, right? Sales so accordingly, he wins these sales contests, and he has iPads, iPhones, trips for two to Vegas, all these kind of things that he wins. So he sells a lot and he wins these competitions. What else do we have? What is another major thing that dramatically impacts sales? The big thing is, of course, the role of technology, right? And I would argue, broadly speaking, that these days, those successful salespeople are conversant and adept at using technology. And so there are a lot of useful technological software packages that can greatly assist the salesperson. Software packages like organizing sales calls, customer information files, all these kind of things that can help the salesperson in the execution of their duties, right? We also see that in some industries, it's all virtual selling, right? Selling online. If you want to get a mortgage these days, 99% of the time when you purchase a mortgage as a product, for example, you do it online, Or at the very least, you would phone somebody up and talk to somebody. They would set it all up online, and then you would go into a bricks and mortar outlet to do the signing, right? So virtual selling becomes very, very important. So these are key things. Furthermore, it raises the question that how should sales be thought of and organized in a firm? Well, from a management perspective, we realize that a sales force it's a very expensive thing. It's a very costly endeavor to maintain a sales force,
train,
and to recruit and to train. So training, recruiting, retention, these are very, very challenging managerial and management issues that have to be dealt with, right? And so that is key. Furthermore, interestingly, within large organizations, we see that there is very often a siloed kind of organizational structure between the sales organization and the marketing organization. 99% of the time for big organizations, these are different silos, different organizations. So you have a VP of marketing, you have a VP of sales. Generally speaking, and a lot of research has been done into this, generally speaking, the marketers, they hate the salespeople, and the salespeople, they hate the marketers. A lot of interpersonal conflict between the two organizations, actually. So it's interesting from that perspective. The way that I like to see the sales force is that I like to think of them really as being the eyes and ears of the firm. So when you have a sales force out there in the field at the interface with the customer, guess what? You can get a lot of information from your salespeople, and that's what you want to tap into. So they are the eyes and ears, source of great marketplace information and intelligence that they can bring into the firm. And lastly, we recognize that I would say it takes a very special person to be in sales, right? Me, myself, I am absolutely not good for that kind of thing. I would never want to do that myself. But other people, they do it, and they love it, and they thrive, and they're fantastic at it, and I say, hey, good on them for doing it. Sales is a very stressful kind of a thing. You have to have, a thick skin to be able to withstand rejection. you know? And that is a major thing, right? That is a major psychological impact on salespeople is rejection, fear of rejection, dealing with rejection. They also have to, face the stress of surpassing quotas.
Quotas,
That's another
always,
hugely stressful thing for
yeah,
these guys, right?
high stress.
Huh?
It's very high stress
It
environment.
really is, and I commend
Not
it. It is
always-
a tough position. It's
Okay,
President
security
targets,
Yep,
jumps.
monthly targets
Yep.
to meet.
absolutely, absolutely. And, in retail outlets, especially low-end mom and pop retail outlets, you see that compensation for the salespeople who are on the floor is generally quite low, often part-time work, and according, it's a fairly high turnover kind of a thing too, right? So you have that going on. So a lot of stuff going on here. And so we realized then that ultimately the theme that we've been speaking about here is all about getting that product into the hands of
Consumer.
And to help us understand that, we look at the channels of distribution. Management is very important, and we recognize that retailing that last channel is especially nuanced and important. So next class, we will talk about my favorite topic area, which is pricing. And with that, I wish you all a very pleasant evening, and I would highly recommend that you carve out a few minutes right here and now and review your notes and, bring yourself up to speed. Take 10 minutes right now, and do your notes and time will spend.